So, what if one of the greatest moments in human history was actually a show? Today, we are diving deep into the work of the eminent dissident writer Dave McGowan. In his book, Wagging the Moondoggie, he lays out a pretty compelling case that questions the official story of the Apollo moon landings. He really felt it was time for a fresh, critical look. Okay, let's start with something that'll make you pause. This quote isn't from some critic. It's from Wernher von Braun, the father of the Saturn V rocket. He himself called the direct trip to the moon an economic impossibility. The fact that the guy who supposedly solved the problem said this, well, it really sets the stage for every single question McGowan is about to ask. So, who exactly is Dave McGowan? Well, he was a meticulous investigator, and he saw his personal mission here as an effort to ferret out the truth. He looked at the whole moon landing debate and thought, this has gotten stale. It's time for a fresh perspective and some new insights. And that's exactly what he set out to provide. Now, McGowan frames his entire argument around a concept called the big lie. The idea is that a lie can be so huge, so completely audacious, that people just can't wrap their heads around the idea that someone would even try to pull it off. For McGowan, the Apollo program is the perfect example of this theory in action. And right here, McGowan basically turns the tables and talks directly to us, the readers. He's not just presenting facts, he's asking us to think about how we think. His core message is simple. Stop blindly following authority. Trust what you can see, trust your own cognitive abilities. What's really fascinating about McGowan's approach is where he begins. He doesn't start with the evidence we have. Nope, he starts with the crucial evidence that he says has been completely wiped from the record, making it pretty much impossible for anyone to independently verify the story today. Just take a look at this list. He points out that the original telemetry data, that's over 13,000 reels of tape tracking everything about the spacecraft, is gone. The original high-quality TV footage vanished. And maybe the most unbelievable part, the actual blueprints for the Saturn V rockets, the lunar modules, and the rovers, they've all disappeared. And we're not talking about a few files lost in a cabinet somewhere. In 2006, NASA itself had to admit that 700 cartons of original recordings were missing. McGowan argues this is no accident. He sees it as the deliberate scrubbing of an entire historical event. And this pattern, he says, continues with the physical evidence. He brings up that famous story about the Dutch museum whose moon rock turned out to be just a piece of petrified wood. And it gets bigger. He cites an AP investigation that found that nearly 90% of the moon rocks that were gifted to other countries, well, nobody knows where they are. All right, so let's shift gears and look at the technology itself. This is where McGowan really digs into what he sees as just profound technological impossibilities, starting with the lunar module. McGowan does not hold back here. He describes the lunar module as this bizarre, flimsy thing that looked like it was held together with wrapping paper, tape, and zippers. He basically calls it an oversized Jiffy Pop container and asks the question, how could this thing possibly survive in space, let alone land on the moon and then blast off again? To really put this in perspective, McGowan wants us to remember what the 1960s were actually like. We're talking rotary phones, TVs with rabbit ears. Pocket calculators weren't even a thing yet. His point is, even though NASA's tech was obviously top of the line for its day, it was still a product of an era that seems almost comically primitive compared to the supercomputer you're carrying in your pocket right now. And that leads him to this massive question. Back in the late 60s, we supposedly sent men 234,000 miles to the moon. But today, with 50 years of insane technological growth, the farthest we send people is about 400 miles into low Earth orbit. Why, he asks, did we take this incredible leap forward, only to spend the next half-century not even coming close? McGowan is especially skeptical of the lunar module's ascent engine. He points out that this thing was totally untested. I mean, you can't just replicate the moon's gravity and vacuum for a test flight on Earth. It was a theoretical concept. And yet, as he puts it with a whole lot of sarcasm, it worked perfectly. Not just once, but 6 times in a row. Then he moves on to what he sees as the absolute deal breaker, radiation. He found a 2005 NASA article calling deep space radiation a potential showstopper for any future moon missions. So the obvious question is, if this deadly radiation is a showstopper now, how on earth did the Apollo astronauts survive it in the 1960s with what he claims was basically no shielding? Okay, now we get to the most famous and probably the most debated piece of evidence there is. All those photos supposedly taken on the moon. For McGowan, these pictures aren't proof of anything. They're just a source of 1,000 questions. First, he points out just how hard it would have been to take these pictures. He quotes the chief designer of the Hasselblad cameras they used, who flat out said the astronauts couldn't even use the viewfinder. The cameras were strapped to their chests, so they had to aim by moving their whole body. Right, and a Kodak executive who supplied the film pretty much confirmed this, saying they had to effectively guess. So think about that. You've got amateur photographers in these bulky suits with cameras they can't even aim, and somehow they came back with thousands of perfectly composed, crystal-clear photos. McGowan just finds that impossible to believe. Then he runs down the classic list of anomalies that have been fueling this debate forever. No stars in the sky, shadows that point in different directions like you'd get from studio lights, things in the shadows that are perfectly visible when they should be pitch black. And, my favorite, the exact same backgrounds showing up in photos that were supposedly taken miles apart. But this all leads to the biggest question of all, right? Why? Why would anyone go to all the trouble to fake something this huge? Well, McGowan offers a pretty powerful motive, and it's tied directly to the chaos of the late 60s and the title of his book. Take a look at this timeline, because this is his central thesis. McGowan shows how every single major Apollo event, the amazing landings, the terrifying Apollo 13 crisis, just so happened to line up perfectly with some horrible news coming out of the Vietnam War. For him, Apollo wasn't about exploring space. It was the ultimate patriotic distraction from a brutal, unpopular war. And the moment the war was over, the trips to the moon stopped. So you see, for McGowan, this whole thing isn't really about rockets and moon rocks. The Apollo story is a test. It's about our relationship with information and about questioning the official stories that were handed down by the institutions we're supposed to trust. And that's the question he leaves us with. It's really the final takeaway from his whole investigation. He argues that if a lie on this scale was even possible, well, then it kind of opens the door to questioning everything. It's a really provocative thought, and it challenges the very foundation of history as we know it.